welcome to Money Talks. I'm your host, Bill Barheit, founder and CEO at Abra. We're broadcasting from Bitcoin 2022 in beautiful Miami. I am joined today by our Bitcoin analyst, Natalie Brunell, and we have a special guest, founder and CEO, did I get the title right? Founder and CEO of Zion. Justin is going to tell us all about Zion in a few minutes. Huge news coming out of the Bitcoin 2022 show this week. Yesterday we had Michael Saylor and Cathie Wood on stage. Cathie explaining why she thinks Bitcoin is going to $1 million. Peter Thiel basically giving his list of Bitcoin enemies with, who was enemy number one? Well, we have a long list of enemies to get to, I see here. There's no enemy number one, it's just a long list. Ricardo Salinas, and of course, what everybody's talking about this morning, Jack Mallers' really interesting keynote and diatribe against the existing payment system, which I'm sure we'll get into, and I see some questions and comments already coming in on the live chat on that. So let's talk about some of the Bitcoin news we're seeing this week. So did you get a chance to watch Cathie and Michael Saylor, Natalie?
Yeah, so I was actually live anchoring on the Bitcoin conference news desk, which I don't know if you've seen it. It's brand new from last year and it's
beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah,
we were able to do
really
some
nice
commentary, so I got to listen to a lot of yesterday's panels and then offer a discussion in between. So I listened to Cathie Wood and Michael Saylor, who I love, legend obviously, and they were just so articulate about the power of Bitcoin as a store of value. Cathie Wood, obviously very bullish, despite you know maybe investors not being so happy if they invested in ARK in the last year.
Sure.
But yeah, she says $1 million Bitcoin by 2030. It's really funny. I commented on one of the tweets about that. Well, what's $1 million going to be worth in 2030, right? $1 million US dollars at that point. But you know, one of the other things she said too, they were talking about politicians and just sort of the movement to making sure that policymakers are educated and making sound decisions, moving Bitcoin in the right direction. And she said the US will lose if it makes the wrong decision about Bitcoin.
So let's talk about the politicians thing for a minute, because Michael Saylor said something, and I don't remember the exact wording he used, but more or less he said it's becoming a bipartisan issue. I'm not sure I agree with that, because I look at a lot of the commentary from the left. I mean, I saw some tweets from Hillary Clinton with some video, which was horrifying to me. I realize she's not, active in Congress anymore, but nevertheless, I'm seeing very different commentary from the likes of like Senator Loomis, who has really become almost a cheerleader for monetary freedom. And I mean, what's your take? I mean, it really does seem like we're at a kind of a bifurcation now with some of this commentary.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I mean, certainly everyone knows now Senator Loomis is really on Team Bitcoin. She actually was working with Jack Mallers, making sure to push some of this forward so that Bitcoin can be used as a payment rail here in the US. But I've always seen Bitcoin as apolitical. On the right, I think that it resonates with the fundamental values of small government, fewer taxes, freedom, self-determination, which the conservatives are very passionate about. But man, I mean, how can you not see Bitcoin as a progressive freedom technology, as a democratic form of money that has no borders, has no CEO, has no political leaders, and it banks the unbanked. It provides financial inclusivity. One of the interesting panels yesterday, I thought, were all the athletes that were sitting there. People of color, backgrounds, like all diverse, humble, upbringings. They found Bitcoin, and actually, Serena was touching on the point that many people of African descent, African American descent, people of color, they are more likely to invest in crypto and Bitcoin and find value in it than actually the average adult. So I find that to be absolutely fascinating and powerful. So if people like Elizabeth Warren want to represent the average American and help them be able to provide for their family, save for the future, then they should really educate themselves on Bitcoin. And yet, I'm sure you've seen this on Twitter, we've tried to educate people like Elizabeth Warren, and they just seem to just push back. They don't even want to hear arguments. They just cut people off during congressional hearings, which is super frustrating.
Right. Well, they have an agenda. Right. I mean, clearly, if you're going to cut somebody off who's making a logical argument, it's either because you don't want to hear it, or you have an agenda, or both.
Totally. Yeah, and that's wrong. So there's a movement to make sure that Bitcoin is bipartisan. There are people working to educate policymakers based on their backgrounds, the constituents of the places they represent. But certainly, right now we've seen more elected officials on the conservative side grasp the concepts first, I think, and I really hope that the message doesn't get hijacked, because we do have kind of a precedent in this country where when one side adopts something or says they're for it, the other side almost like just to stick it to them says we're against it. And that should not happen to Bitcoin, because as Michael Saylor has pointed out in pretty much every speech, this is universally recognized as digital property.
Right.
This is a way to bring, a savings technology to billions of people across the world who can't access stocks, who can't access a bank. And I think it's really powerful. So politicians just need to educate themselves, and we need to do the work as well.
Absolutely. And okay, we have to talk about this. So I'm sure you watched Jack Mallers' presentation, keynote, whatever you want to call it. What was your reaction? Well, actually, let's take a step back. So for those who didn't see it or aren't here in Miami, Jack Mallers last year, I guess, is given credit for bringing President Bukele on stage from El Salvador to announce their initiative to make Bitcoin legal tender. This year, everybody was obviously excited to see, is he going to top last year? And he basically spent 45 minutes talking about a new payment system. He spent the first kind of half of that railing against the what he called boomers of the payments world. And he walked through the history of Diners Club and MasterCharge to MasterCard and Visa, et cetera, and why the payment system, in his opinion, hasn't changed in 80 years, and how Lightning was going to fix all of the woes of the payment system, and then proceeded to explain their partnerships with the likes of Shopify and I believe Blackhawk. Well, I know Blackhawk, and I think the NCR, which is the POS point of sale system used by about 15% of most retailers, larger retailers in the United States. And the idea being that you could now pay via non-card networks at 80 to 85% of merchants in the U.S., and he listed a lot of them: McDonald's, Walmart, et cetera, and then proceeded to give a demonstration as to how all of that would work at a store, I think, in Chicago. Okay, so now, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I love watching Jack on stage because he's so compelling and he speaks very directly, very simply, and he's authentic. He just is who he is. And I loved, the video showing that it's as simple as pulling up, a QR code, and there you go. You're transacting at lightning speed. You're removing, a third party that doesn't need to be there, that slows everything down, that takes a cut. I love how animated he was talking about how fundamentally broken that system is, and maybe it worked at a time and it was really innovative, but now these handshakes that happen between all of these intermediaries don't need to happen anymore, and the merchant's going to benefit because they're going to see, more of the amount of money that they deserve for whatever good or service that they provide. So I thought it was really fascinating. I thought it's going to increase adoption as people find their way to Bitcoin on these different wallets and Lightning avenues. And I really hope that, I'm surprised that the price is not responding as much as you would expect, when now all of a sudden you could go to Walmart, McDonald's and pay essentially in Bitcoin. But yep. I think that is to come.
I think the press is a little skeptical. I've spoken to press already, and I think the reason they're skeptical is, and this time is very different because it was hundreds of thousands of people and now it's hundreds of millions of people, mm-hmm. But from their perspective, we've been down this road before with Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin was at the point of sale in 2013 and 14, and merchants took it out, right? And the bottom line is it was just too early, right? And then, of course, the second question is, okay, let's say it's not too early. What's the specific pain point from the consumer's perspective that's going to get them to use that Lightning wallet? The best answer I have so far is anonymity. Mm-hmm. And it's unclear to me how the likes of Walmart will respond to that once they understand that Blackhawk has backdoored Lightning into their stores. I don't know that they actually fully understood what was coming mm-hmm. in the announcement yesterday. And they can block it, meaning if Walmart decides that they don't want Blackhawk routing Lightning transactions over their network because they're effectively electronic cash transactions that are anonymous, they may decide, hey, I don't want the political fallout from this. I don't want Elizabeth Warren reeling on Walmart for something she doesn't understand, and that they go back to them and say, just, you know what, turn it off, and we'll figure it out later. I do worry about that, but I think the idea that you could have anonymous cash, digital cash transactions at the point of sale in the United States is extremely compelling to me, especially in light of this ridiculous CBD narrative that I'll retract the word ridiculous for now because we'll see where it comes out. But especially in light of the CBDC narrative coming around, which is, we need this and it'll take a couple of years. It's basically a backdoor in everything. And Lightning represents the opposite of that, which I find super, super interesting. What was any other really exciting things you saw this week, heard about, things that we may not have heard about?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would say that I was a little bit disappointed by the nation-state adoption announcement because my hope and I think a little bit of my expectation was that another country, maybe like El Salvador, would announce that it had adopted Bitcoin officially. It's very exciting when we do have small autonomous regions and islands and, senators in different countries that are speaking about Bitcoin or potentially introducing legislation. It's all bullish, I get it. But, I really was expecting that by this point, especially with all the momentum and all the companies and sort of the conviction that is growing for Bitcoin, I thought that another country would officially come in.
So I've thought a lot about that. I don't think of it in terms of hope. I actually looked at El Salvador a little bit differently. I don't think that they really needed to say Bitcoin is legal tender and say merchants have to accept it. I think if they had gone as far enough as saying, we're committed to saying a proof of work digital currency would not be taxed for capital gains if you use it for payments and convert it to dollars, right? And if they had done that and just got out of the way, I think that would actually have been good enough. I think a lot of merchants on the ground, because we have folks on the ground there, some of them are very upset because they don't understand and they haven't been well educated on what's going on. And so there's clearly a bifurcated audience, and Bukele actually canceled his trip because he's got tremendous violence in his country that he's got to deal with. So he's still in a mess, and Bitcoin is not going to solve that mess anytime soon. And I want this to succeed, but the reality is that it was a mess before Bitcoin, and it's going to be a mess for the country, nothing related to Bitcoin, is going to be a mess for a long time. And I think that other countries who aren't based on the dollar have it even harder. Right, because El Salvador has a dollar economy today and doesn't actually issue their own currency. That makes accepting a digital currency like Bitcoin a much easier proposition. Whether they do it the way they did or the way I'm describing, it's much easier than if you say, okay, I have the Mexican peso, and which was another, I wouldn't call it announcement on stage. It created some confusion, but we'll talk about that in a second. Saying I'm going to adopt Bitcoin alongside the Mexican peso is a much, much harder proposition. And so let's talk about that for a second. I don't remember the woman's name.
Yeah, the U.S. senator, or I mean the Mexican senator.
Very, very eloquent, very passionate. I think what she basically said, and this got misinterpreted, was that she wants to engage with the government to eventually make Bitcoin legal tender. Is that more or less your understanding?
Yeah, from what I understood, basically that there's going to be hopefully a meeting between the president of Mexico and actually Samson, who left Blockstream in order to dedicate all of his time to nation-state Bitcoin adoption and has worked a lot in El Salvador, and to just get those conversations going. I think that's very far off. I also think that Mexico is very dependent on what America does, and the fact that America has taken a stance basically saying that El Salvador's decision is going to put our financial system at risk. I don't see them being okay with Mexico legalizing Bitcoin, so I think that's many years away. But at the same time, I've visited Mexico many times, and I think people there don't really understand Bitcoin, and maybe now this will spread the education to those communities, which could certainly use Bitcoin as a savings technology. So, I think it's all good. The more that Bitcoin is spread in these nations, even just as a conversation point, I think is great.
Totally agree. Yeah, the confusion was I actually had people come up to me and say, did you hear that Mexico is making Bitcoin legal tender? And this aggravates me because, it also kind of, it downplays the hard work that people are doing behind the scenes to educate and make it happen. And anyway, okay.
I sometimes feel like people scroll through headlines and they just like their brain picks out 3 words and then they turn it into their own headline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah. All right, I want to talk about Lightning. And I want to bring this over to our special guest, Justin Rezvani. Did I say your name right?
That's correct.
We've known each other, good friends, and I know, actually, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it.
Rezvani is correct.
Rezvani is correct.
That's
Okay.
correct.
So Justin is the CEO of Zion, a super interesting startup that actually uses Lightning. I'll share my screen here so you all can see the site while we're talking. But Justin, can you explain to us in terms that I can understand, because I'm a simple guy, like what is Zion? And how does it use Lightning?
So it's a censorship-resistant social network that allows creators and fans to directly monetize using the Lightning Network.
Okay.
A little bit of my background was I started a company that connected fans, specifically brands and influencers a long time ago, and I was using PayPal as the payment rails to have them monetize, and I that was like the best way to do it in 2011. Mm-hmm. But I knew a better way was, could a fan directly monetize, could an influencer directly monetize from their fans through payment rails, through more efficient payment rails, for an individual piece of content, for a microtransaction under a penny. That is not possible through a credit card. It's not possible through a bank wire. It's not possible through PayPal. You can't move under a penny in any other system. Lightning Network gets introduced, you can move as little as 1 Satoshi across a Lightning channel, which is 0.00035 cents for a photo. So that's how we implement in using Lightning, is the fact that a creator can monetize with their fans by micropayments using the Lightning Network.
Okay. And how do you, like, it seems like you have kind of a chicken and egg, like any other kind of, social media, marketplace, wherever direction you want to go. How do you kickstart that? Like, how do you get it going?
The flywheel in our particular strategy, like to be able to move the flywheel, my strategy was to take the last 10 years of my career and apply it into Bitcoin. So I understand influence and influencers very well. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I went and found a co-founder that had 6.5 million followers. Okay. That's JP Sears. Yep. Then I started bringing in investors that reach millions of people. Later on Tony Robbins. Then I layer on Aubrey Marcus, Mark Moss, Robert Breedlove, Anthony Pompliano.
So you have
Aaron Rodgers.
An affinity for strong personalities.
a little bit.
I mean, JP's like over the top.
JP's over the top, but his message is around freedom.
Yeah.
And so my goal as his partner is to say, I want to replace centralized social media, because I think generally it is a detriment to society.
So what are you competing with, by the way? Like,
I think competing with Patreon for sure.
Okay.
I think that's one of the biggest ones, because we look at Patreon as this proxy of like, oh, fans can support creators. But if you think about how Patreon actually works, there's 7 layers of companies in between the creator and the fan. You have the credit card, you have the credit card processor, you have the website host of the credit card processor, then you have Patreon as a service itself, and then you have a bank. All of these elements that lead you and kind of take the system, and similar to the conversation you were just having about how do payments work with retail. This applies to creators as well, where in Lightning, a true Lightning transaction is from a node to another node through a channel.
Right, okay, so a couple of things. Why Bitcoin and Lightning for Zion?
Because we weren't able to figure out another blockchain that could move a microtransaction at the speed of light. I didn't want to invent my own token because I felt like I'm not equipped to do that, and we wanted to use the most sound money there is.
And why not just basically use a database and have microtransactions over like SQL?
Because that is not an interoperable, scalable network. Okay. The beautiful thing about Zion is that no matter what we do, this will be open source and interoperable. So there might be other apps that come down the line that implement Lightning. And we think that Lightning will be the eventual payment rails of most applications on the internet.
So when you say open source, you mean on the payment network?
And on the actual application.
So you're actually open sourcing Zion itself?
100% open source.
Wow.
So right now, if you go, and this is interesting, on my panel yesterday, I'm sitting on a panel with how to build Lightning companies. There's 5 Lightning companies on this panel, and I'm the only open source one. And I'm looking around, I was like, what are you guys doing here? Like, for us, it's not about building another walled garden. That's how we got on this problem in the first place. You have all of these walled gardens around that saying, oh, we're proprietary this, we have this proprietary algorithm, we have this proprietary user base, we take identity and centralize everything. The new world has to be an open source standard, and what you should compete for in the user base is not all the proprietary information you have, is how do you create value inside the client, inside the actual application? How do you provide value for the user in a much more impactful way and then compete at that layer?
So in theory, if I take your open source software, I could deploy a Zion client that competes with you.
100%.
Okay. Now Twitter went down that route in the very early days, and they kind of did a little bit of a rug pull with other software providers, right? I mean, so do you think that having a developer ecosystem around Zion is a key part, or is it more we just want the code out there for people to know how it works?
I think there's one element for me right now is that I push this, don't trust me, verify everything that we're telling you. Trust where the data is going, trust how we establish identity, trust how we move payments. Like I don't want and I think this is very rare because you have companies making these massive announcements that are not open source when you actually don't know what's happening underneath the hood. And I prefer, just as me as an individual, like I want everything to be out in the open, at least for me in my business, because I'm a very transparent individual.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this anyway. I don't know if you want to talk about this. If you don't, it's okay. But do you actually think that Lightning can scale today to service a global network of merchants?
Absolutely not. I think that if it's...
I guess he wants to answer.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I don't, because we have about 3,000 Bitcoin of liquidity onto the Lightning Network. The way Lightning works, and this is actually how it works, not like on stage how it works, is that you have two nodes that are established within the network. Then you take Bitcoin, you escrow into a channel. You have to take Bitcoin out of the main chain to create this like pipe that then you can move funds across this specific channel. Now if you imagine you want billions of dollars, which is what would be required, you essentially have to take Bitcoin and make billions of channels worth of Bitcoin to start transacting in this open network for it to work at Walmart. How much money moves at Walmart? That requires a ton of Bitcoin in order to do that, if it is Lightning.
Meaning, just to be very clear, so if you're processing billions of dollars in payments, effectively billions of dollars have to exist in those channels already in order for this to work.
And it's only 3,000 Bitcoin that are on the Lightning Network.
Okay, so if Goldman Sachs decided to support, BlackHawk and say, I'm going to put $10 billion into Lightning channels to make that work, does that solve the problem?
Potentially. Because then you still need to have the node architecture to be able to build that in the back end. What most of these companies are doing is they're building sophisticated account systems on databases. That's the truth of what's happening. And the reason I say this is because Zion is a company that has 3,500 nodes and over 4,000 channels on the Lightning Network. 13% of all nodes on the Lightning Network that are public with open channels are run on my infrastructure. So I know how it works. I've been 75% of all the nodes added in the last 6 months are my nodes. I know how this works because I'm there building.
Do all the folks in the Lightning community know, or are they aware
of
Zion's overall impact on the network
They
today?
know because every node is named Zion.
I see.
Every new node, if you go to the top channels, if you go to every Explorer, Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo are our routing nodes.
I see.
So they know. They know. If you know, you know. It's one of those if you know, you know things.
Okay, without getting...
And there are private, by the way, there are private things, there are private nodes, there are private channels. I don't want to discount that. There are stuff happening, but the account system is a very real thing.
Okay, but to move it back to Zion, I think it's, what's compelling to me is that you're taking a decentralized cryptocurrency and you're taking an open source community, and I see that you're a creator on the site, so I want to get your comment on this, Natalie, in a minute. But what's compelling to me about this is you've got open source community, you've got an open source decentralized cryptocurrency in the form of Bitcoin that can handle microtransactions, which have traditionally over 30 years have failed on the web. Because there was just no realistic way to deal with them. And you've made it viable for content creators and consumers for the first time. And consumers have traditionally been the product on social network more to their detriment because they're being manipulated.
Exactly.
Right?
For their attention.
But we all do it anyway because there's some value we get out of it, whether we're being manipulated or not. So from your perspective as a well-known content creator in the Bitcoin community, what's compelling to you about Zion?
Yeah, well, I remember when Justin first reached out to me, and one of the things that he pointed out, because he's worked with so many content creators and so many big ones, is I don't own anything that I put onto YouTube or Twitter, right? They own it, and it's centralized. And in the last year, and really since the pandemic, we've seen so much censorship. We've seen presidents kicked off of Twitter, yet the Taliban exists, and then there's this decision-making.
That's totally fucked up.
Yeah, there's a decision-making process that you are not a part of, but you're subject to. And so I find it compelling that there would be a form of social media that is obviously built on Bitcoin. It's not some different token, because everybody knows I'm very skeptical of other cryptocurrencies out there. But also on top of that, that you have full ownership, and it's censorship resistant, and no one can ever control it. The problem, however, is that, first of all, we're saturated with media outlets, right? Like when there was a big controversy of Joe Rogan, I think being booted off Twitter temporarily or something happening with the show, he went on Getter, Gettr, and everyone was flocking to that platform. Then there's this next one, and its network effect is very powerful. And so, it's hard as a content creator to post on every single channel and be active and just stay on top of everything, because it's so time consuming, and each one almost has its own unique audience. And so for me, I think that's the biggest challenge. And I guess my question to Justin is, like, how do you overcome that network effect hurdle? Because obviously everyone wants to be where the biggest following, the biggest audience is.
I think that the proxy is that Getter, all of these things are building the exact same thing. They're building, just take Twitter, replace the logo. It's the same tech stack. It's a LAMP stack, building a database, your username is sitting on an SQL database. They own everything again. Just remember, that's the first proxy, is that for the first time, we allow you to actually own the relationship with your audience, because you establish your digital identity, and everyone forever will know Natalie Brunell's DID is this, her decentralized web node is hosted here, and this is her Lightning Wallet address. And your payment will move, like right now, your podcast, because remember we established your node on Zion?
Yes.
People are streaming you sats for your podcast through all these different podcast apps because you have a Zion node. And that address, they know forever that they're going to send you money to that address. Even if Zion goes down, it doesn't matter for us, right? We're still giving you a node to host. That's in perpetuity. That's a different kind of promise. Because yes, these centralized platforms are offering the same thing, but if that gets turned off, you lose everything again. In this new world, it goes with you forever in perpetuity. That's the difference. That's like the big distinction. The network effect is going to be a challenge. My bet is the people I'm associating myself with. It's like, I think if we are the first network that's owned by creators themselves, we actually have a chance. And that's my just strategy in general. And I think it will be a winning one.
And how does Zion make money in that
So
model?
right now, the current business model is that if you're a creator and developing communities inside the application, it's not just that you're posting, you're paying a fee to run a node, and you pay that to us, and that's the current monetization process. But the end state for our business is a marketplace. The end state will be that there's billions of these microtransactions moving inside of the Zion network for a photo, for a meme, for your favorite content, streaming for a podcast, watching a video like this video by the end of next year, and you're just sending sats while you're streaming the video on the phone. That's the end state, and then we take a little bit of every one of those transactions. That's the end state of the business.
Got it. Okay, so it's really a big scale business, right? I mean, you're talking about micro piece of a micro transaction, which you need billions of those transactions.
And I believe what we've seen so far, so we have about 3,000 creators using the application. We processed over 114,000 transactions since we've launched with only 3,000 people. I think the proxy is there to build a massive business on the back of that. I can see the numbers, and I can see the amount of things moving between people, because for the first time, it's not just a fan giving a creator a payment. You can actually pay your fans, and then fans can pay each other. That proxy doesn't exist in traditional social media right now, where you can look at a comment and, man, I really like the value of that comment. We're creating an entire new layer of the creator economy, is that the fans of the creators can now monetize for being a professional consumer of content.
I do want to bring something up because I know you've talked about this with Michael Saylor, but there's such a huge issue right now with the old school, the traditional platforms like Twitter, with scammers. It's something I'm starting to battle with that I never thought I would. But people are creating fake accounts of me, and because I speak about finance and Bitcoin, they're trying to lead people, into potentially situations where they'll lose money, and that breaks my heart, right? And I know Michael Saylor, like, he gets like 1 million bots a second, he can't keep up with them, but he introduced that concept on one Twitter Spaces of the idea that your Twitter account would be hooked up to a Lightning network or Lightning node, and you would essentially put up money, and if you were scamming, you would essentially be de-incentivized. You would get that money, you would lose the money, so that you don't do that again. And repeat offenders obviously could potentially lose a lot of money, so it would deter some of these accounts. So can you offer perspective on that?
So this is a conversation I've had with Michael a lot, and particularly around this concept of accreditation. So right now in traditional social media, you can start an account with basically nothing, and you can start posting with nothing, and there's no consequences for being a bad actor. But in a future state, and let's say like this is inside of Zion, everything's tied to a wallet. Every one of your transactions, for example, how we prevent spam is that you bond a certain amount of Bitcoin when you make a comment. And there's a contract length of 24 hours that if the creator, that's community you're in, deletes your comment for hate speech or whatever they want to call it, spam, you lose your bond. You lose what you staked to make that comment. Now apply that same thing to a centralized network. Imagine if you had to go to Twitter and say, I want to accreditate my account. I want to have an orange checkbox on my Twitter, and what I'm going to do is pay 100,000 sat Lightning invoice to be accredited. And Michael Saylor decides that the only people I want to interact with my account are people that are accredited users, that they have a certain bond set to their social profile. So now applying what we did in Zion in this small network to any centralized network. There's a theoretical spec that I put out in January, which if you go on Twitter, you can see the spec. There's a possibility to do that at some end state.
So is accredited in your model the equivalent of a social score, or is it deeper than that?
No. It's accredited because you have money tied to an ID.
Okay. But in theory, if scamming somebody was worth more than the money I was putting up, then
people would do it. People would do it. But right now, the proxy is 0. Right? Like, let's see if we increase the proxy.
The Twitter proxy.
It's a proxy on every network.
Sure.
Right now, spam works because it's free. Right? But if you had a prevention memechanism, and by the way, this isn't stuff that we invented. This comes from Hashcash.
Sure, we talked about an email for 30 years.
Yeah,
and it has
Politoid Sphinx kind of really developed that thing. We took it on and followed suit. And I had this in my book. We talked about the history of how this all came about.
Yeah.
It's basically applying proof of work into a social network.
Yep. Okay. By the way, you brought up your book, and I apologize, I didn't mention it. So you do have a book that you came out with it this week. I'll bring it up on Amazon. So tell us about the book.
I have a copy right here. I brought a copy.
Everybody's releasing books.
This came out on Monday.
My book is basically just about. It's going to be called "Who Can I Piss Off in 200 Pages?" And so I'm not so sure. Let me bring this up here while we're talking. But tell us about it, Justin. Go ahead.
So JP, my partner, and I wanted to. The way this book came about was we were thinking about doing a talk called "Defeating Censorship with the Bitcoin Standard," and we wrote an outline for it, and then we sent it to a friend, and they're like, "You should make this a book." So in 8 weeks, I wrote a book, and what it is, it's basically an outline of the history of censorship. Talking a little bit about the centralized century versus the decentralized century, getting into the concept of peer governance versus platform governance, and then finally the end state of how does Bitcoin solve all the problems we are dealing with censorship through a digital standard. It's just a story of the problems we're dealing with and then a potential solution in the end. And it's a short 2.5 hour read. I'm so blessed that our investor Tony Robbins did the endorsement on the cover for me. I mean, I'm a giddy child about this because he's been a hero of mine for so long. He's my business partner, but he gave the endorsement on my first book. And that just feels really good to me. I have so much gratitude that my partner JP did the foreword.
It's awesome.
His perspective as a creator around freedom is really interesting because every day he's kind of at risk of losing everything. Because and by the way, so are you. You're almost 200,000 Twitter followers at any moment are not yours. I hate to. I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's just the truth of the matter. It's like they're not. Like they're not yours. And I think what we want to say is there's an opportunity to build a relationship through money for the first time. I think that's a really interesting aspect of like, forever this is where your creator lives and you can pay them at any time. And that doesn't exist in any other environment at all, because you're not going to put your bank account up there. You can put your Lightning address.
Awesome. I read it. I think it's awesome, and I'm really excited for where this could go. And you guys have also, I don't know if have you announced any funding, or are you going to be announcing funding?
We're going to announce it. I don't think anything's out yet, but it's quite a bit of a...
You don't want to break any news here?
I don't think no.
Okay, all right.
Maybe we will later.
Okay,
yeah,
all good.
Maybe later.
All good. So how can people learn more about Zion?
Website is getzion.com. If you want to sign up we're actually have closed our infrastructure from V1 moving into V2. So if you want to see the latest, just put your email in on the website and you'll be the first to know.
Got it up here right now for folks, getzion.com.
So, and then you could follow JP and I on our handles. We share a lot about what's going on.
I mean, some of his videos on Bitcoin were absolutely hilarious.
So the largest, I think he has over 1 million views. When we announced JP and I were speaking at the conference, we did a video on it. It was, I think it's the biggest video about the conference, actually.
I mean, we'll try to find the video.
It's so good.
It's so funny.
JP is an artist, and the way he talked about it, I think it was like if people that love fiat were Bitcoin maxis, and wow,
basically reversed
the role. Like you're a fiat maxi because like I'm going to the fiat conference this weekend. Like are you going to be at the fiat conference? Like stuff like that. He's very funny. That's so awesome. Blessed to have him.
Well, we're really happy for you. We're excited to see where this goes. Speaking for myself and Abra, I mean, I know where our plans are headed. We haven't announced everything we're doing in payments yet, and I can tell you that this is a big deal to us as supporters of True Lightning. And yeah, we wish you guys nothing but the best, and we're going to follow real closely, and we'll have you back, and we want to. Let's get some influencers on at some point and get their perspective as you guys are.
I'd love JP to come on and talk about this stuff.
Yeah, but you know, let's do a roundtable of influencers who are basically using Lightning and understand from their perspective, you know, what's working and what's not working, and we can send that message to the community.
Yeah, and I also think with one note is I don't think the killer end state for Lightning is payments. I think there's an opportunity that I think social will be the experience that breaks through. And
what's the difference?
Well, I think that social, because right now you have all of these companies that have standalone wallets that basically do nothing but pay for things. People never use them, they never go on them. It's very rare that they're using. I mean, your product is different because it's yield, it does all these amazing things besides just pay for a thing. But they're standalone products. But how you get an application to be used dozens of times to route hundreds of millions of payments, and then also, by the way, you can pay for things. I think that's the killer end state of using Lightning, and that's kind of why our belief is we want to be the de facto payment processor of the creator economy.
Very interesting. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to ask both of you, I don't know if you saw this yet. I'm going to bring up the webpage here. So there was a demo, and I watched it end to end very carefully. With my technology eye on, of a group that figured out how to pump tether through a Lightning channel. I don't know if
this is Synonym?
Yes.
Yep.
So did you have a chance to watch this
demo?
John
John Carvalho's demo. I've seen it. I've known John for a while.
Yeah, me too. So what did you think?
I think, well, first of all, this is happening with the latest release of Taro by Lightning Labs. So this has been, I mean, we've known about this for a few months now with the ability that you can move a stable coin onto a Lightning channel and be able to move that back and forth directly. So I think it's very interesting. I think it's amazing that you can set a proxy to $1.
I think it's huge.
And
I'll explain why.
For us, it's like an amazing thing because what you're doing is using Lightning as a transport layer for a stable coin.
Yeah.
And so it's all the promises that have been like...
And I've had private, we're playing homage to Michael Saylor, it seems, in this show today, but he and I have discussed this as well. Offline, he says very different, not very different. He includes things in the conversation he doesn't normally say online. But yesterday, on stage, 35,000 people, he referred to this as a big deal. All right, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact words, but basically he said, being able to pump USD over Lightning is a big deal. I completely agree. And I have a slightly different take on how Bitcoin is going to evolve from a payments perspective. I hadn't considered the social angle until you and I met. But I'm actually starting to warm up to what you're saying, and I like it a lot. But our theory at Abra is that people don't want to sell Bitcoin. Michael doesn't have to go up on stage and say, don't sell your Bitcoin. Right? Once you have it, I've never met anybody who wants to sell their Bitcoin. I mean, maybe you have. You're shaking you're right.
No,
okay.
I'm buying more.
So right, exactly. I'm buying more too. Right.
Like
I actually have set up my auto buy in Abra. I love it. So the question is, okay, well, I spent an hour of my life listening to Jack yesterday. We've just talked about social channels via Lightning. How do we reconcile the fact that nobody wants to sell their Bitcoin? And the fact that in the US, nobody wants to pay capital gains to be able to buy something with Bitcoin, large or small, especially small, because if I'm doing it thousands of times a year, I don't want to deal with a spreadsheet with 1,000 rows to deal with capital gains taxes calculations on my Bitcoin. And hopefully that'll become a non-problem at some point. But either way, nobody wants to sell. So our theory is that people will hold the Bitcoin as the appreciating asset and borrow in real time in dollars, which is the depreciating asset. That's what we do at Abra. We'll give you, you all know this, those of you watching, because a lot of you are doing it, we'll give you a 15% value loan to value ratio loan against your Bitcoin right now for 0 interest. In other words, if you're holding $1,000 worth of Bitcoin with Abra, we'll lend you right now, $150, 0 interest. That's the future of payments, because if Bitcoin becomes that intergenerational wealth, that's the appreciating asset forever, what you want to do is you want to borrow in the depreciating asset and spend that at the point of sale. Which begs the question, well, what does that have to do with any of this? Because the existing payment networks already deal with that, right? So that's why I think Tether over Lightning is super interesting to me, because it integrates both of these concepts now in a way that I think the maxis, and you're closer to that world than I am, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the maxis are going to have a very hard time poo-pooing. I mean, how do you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think you're right. I mean, Michael Saylor has been speaking to this for a long time, and unfortunately there are some politicians out there that I think see stablecoins as a threat to the US dollar. They see everything as a threat to the US dollar.
Except themselves, ironically.
Exactly. But ultimately, I mean, it's going to be a development and a payment rail in the space that we need, because you're right, people want to spend their fiat, they want to save their Bitcoin, and ultimately that's the direction that we're headed in. I think Jack touched on that a little bit as well. It's like you can choose to spend your dollars, you don't have to touch your Bitcoin, which is one of the things that I think is really powerful and most relevant here in the US, where we have the concept of saving and a savings technology that hasn't really spread in other countries yet, right? In the developing nations, the concept of saving is still pretty foreign, and people have to educate them about that aspect of Bitcoin, and that's what I've seen, at least in places like El Salvador. But I heard about Lightning Labs. Actually, the person who brought it up to me was Lynn Alden during a panel this week. She's super excited about Taro. So awesome. I think even the biggest names in Bitcoin are very, very excited about this. And certainly this is way better than a central bank digital currency, which I know we're going to have as well. But I think stablecoins are going to be the future.
And then there's assets as well. I think I'm also very excited about the asset piece inside of this experience, where there's going to be this concept of a digital asset inside that environment.
Well, if putting my kind of I love decentralization hat on for a second, we had Do Kwon on the show last week.
Amazing.
Did you see the
billions of Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Right.
So now I think a lot of Bitcoiners are skeptical, and I think they should be. But I also think that they should dig in a little bit and understand what's going on. And Tether is not decentralized. There's nothing about it that's decentralized. It's a bunch of treasuries and cash in a bank, represented by an Ethereum smart contract. The Ethereum smart contract might be decentralized, but if the government confiscates the cash, it's no different than the government confiscating your bank account, whether it's represented by a smart contract or not. And what's interesting about Terra Luna and potentially DAI, which Joe is not a fan of, is that these are in theory decentralized dollars, and if you can figure out how to pump those over Lightning, in theory you can make the claim you've got decentralized dollars, basically being represented by decentralized pristine collateral, which is Bitcoin. Yeah. I don't know how this is going to play out. But I'm pretty sure that we've gotten a very interesting glimpse as to where all of this is going. this week.
And I think one thing that this is also solidifying the fact that Bitcoin is digital property. And I think you can actually build a property map to it. One of the things I always like to say is like, when you take regular Bitcoin as digital property and convert it into a Lightning channel, you're converting a metal object into a pipe. Imagine a pipe in a building, and now that pipe can move fluid between two different nodes. You're actually building infrastructure with this digital asset that then will move money into a chain. So thinking about it as actually a thing and a property that can move stuff is pretty trippy. Like that's the stuff that got me into like really excited about Lightning, is that this hard asset is actually a thing that is a transport rails for now other digital currencies.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really awesome. Okay.
But isn't it amazing that now hundreds of millions are going into Bitcoin and the price does nothing? It's like,
So we don't know much about the price.
But is that I mean, okay, let's talk about that for a second. So, and I'll bring up my trusty charts here while we're doing that. So the price has done nothing. We've had war, right? We've had attacks, endless attacks from the likes of Elizabeth Warren, the ESG narrative from BlackRock. I was watching Joe Lonsdale on CNBC this morning, just railing against the ESG, the trifecta of BlackRock and the other CEOs. But
ExxonMobil is mining Bitcoin.
Right. So is that a good thing that the price has done nothing?
Yeah,
is it just more. Is?
Well, I agree with him. It is good for me. I'm not one of the people that's been in it, 10 years. I wish. So for me, if it was already at 100,000, it's like I know it's going to get there, but now I'm accumulating less per purchase.
Right.
So I'm happy about it from that perspective. I just think at the same time it's so surprising because in the last 4 months, if you just think about 2022, all the things that have happened in terms of Bitcoin headlines, I'm shocked that we're not back at least near the all-time highs.
Yeah.
I think what we're dealing with right now in these conversations, it's almost like we're kind of like, I don't like this word to be used, it's like insider trading. We know where the world is going. We know what's going on, that Bitcoin is going to be these things. It's so obvious. We get just to buy more of it at a cheaper price. It's very clear all this stuff is better.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll give you a quick perspective, those online who are pinging me like why are we consolidating here? So last week I talked to all of you about what I hoped would be a pullback to the 44K range. It's exactly what we got and a little bit more. Nothing goes straight up. To me, this thing is coiling right now, and I think that it's exactly what I wanted. I'm going to be shocked if we don't retest the highs in the next 3 to 4 months, if not sooner. So shocked to the extent that I'm totally misreading this. Definitely possible, but I think that's where we're headed. So you may get there sooner than you think, but the fact that with all of the things that transpired in the first 4 months of this year, that we didn't retest the lows is really good news. And I know that there are naysayers out there, let's just go into 5K, anything's possible, but I don't see it happening. I think that Bitcoin is going to diverge from stock prices over the next 100 days dramatically, and I think that Bitcoin and probably Ethereum even more so are going to retest the highs. So that's the weekly. I'll zoom in here on the daily for those of you who can see. We're simply right around that consolidation line I showed you last week in that 45K range, and it's looking like very, very strong support for a next leg up to 50K and to retest the highs. So if you've been able to buy at the lower price, you will be rewarded. Is my take.
Think about everything in
I
stats.
think there's so many, buyers behind the scenes that just aren't coming forward. I mean, I didn't know until yesterday that Serena Williams has been in Bitcoin for 9 years, right? I didn't know Tony Robbins before I met you was a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
ExxonMobil, people, the mainstream media is not making that as big of a story as it did. The same with the insurance company, Washington Mutual, $100 million in Bitcoin. They're not buying gold, they're buying Bitcoin. I mean, it's incredible, and I think it's just not getting the coverage that it should, but if that's suppressing the price.
Part of it is, so we met through Tony. Tony uses AberEarn. I know he said it publicly. I don't normally announce. I can't announce who my clients are for privacy reasons. We're effectively a crypto bank. So certain celebrities like who have said it publicly, I'll talk about, like Tony's said it publicly, Gwyneth Paltrow has said it publicly that she uses Abra Earn, Peter Diamandis has said it publicly. But other than that, one of the things we value in Abra is our clients' privacy, right? And so I can understand why Serena Williams, who probably has a lot of sharks in the moat around her life as it is, doesn't want to be out there talking about the fact that she's putting a lot of her net worth into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I have a team dedicated, and I'm not even, the people who know me is like a round-off error compared to her. And I still have people who have to focus on this because the sharks are around the moat trying to get access to my crypto constantly. And so, security is unfortunately a fact of life, and we have to take the privacy seriously. But it is interesting now that more and more people are willing to start to talk about it.
I mean, Ricardo Salinas yesterday on stage saying 60% of his worth in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I've known Ricardo for a long time, and I am shocked because he's been traditionally a very private person.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
Not only, okay, so we were texting afterwards, and I sent him a picture because I wasn't really sure that he knew if he had. I don't think he made these slides himself, and he had a picture of Janet Yellen and I forget how to say Christine's last name from the IMF, the French woman who runs the IMF. Starts with a G.
Lagarde.
Lagarde, thank you. And somebody else, all with devil's horns on them. And I'm saying, okay. This is the most important, pretty much the second most important businessman in Mexico, arguably after Carlos Slim, basically vilifying the most important bankers in the world. Anyway, I know you have to run because you're hosting the conference this afternoon on stage, so we're all excited to see you do your thing. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you so much. Super excited.
Yeah.
Honored.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Thanks as always for your commentary today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we will. Yeah. So go, do your thing. All right. So let's wrap up. I do have some comments and from the audience. A lot of positive comments on Zion today, by the way. So people are going to check that out.
Blessings. Thank you.
Yep. Getting a lot of hearts, comments on various aspects of what we've done. I did get a couple of questions as we were talking about scammers and social media, specifically about in the short term, before we get to the point where everyone is using Zion, how do people protect themselves? And it's really sad. We have had people lose money to scammers, right? As Abra was going through hypergrowth last year, there was a lot of people trying to impersonate myself or other Abra employees or supports. And we had to have a group dedicated to this. I had to sit down with Facebook executives and Instagram executives. We may not be the biggest company out there, but most of the companies aren't offering crypto financial services. So our scammers are actually costing people a lot of money, not just their attention. Yeah. And so I had to have Facebook and Instagram actually step in, and to the point where normally, I hate to say it, they do nothing. And I had to have them step in and actually take action, and fortunately they did, and they helped us clean up the mess a lot. Twitter, I'm going to call out, they are useless. I mean, I have tried so hard to get Twitter to take action, and they just invariably do. Every time somebody every time somebody tries to pretend that they're Abra online, somebody from Abra has to send the same document again to Twitter. It is insanity. And so, it's like they're basically holding, the scammers are holding the bat with three hands, and we're forced to hold the bat with one hand one time back. It's ridiculous.
It's because their business model is predicated on daily active users, and new accounts drive daily active users up that they sell to advertisers. That's the truth. I mean, if you want to,
that sounds like a total scam to me in and of itself.
It is what it is. That's how they make money.
Okay. All right. So we're getting way more compliments than questions today. Usually we get more questions than compliments. So kudos to Zion and Natalie. I'll give you guys all the credit for that. So we're going on an hour. It's an amazing week. The energy in Miami right now reminds me of Silicon Valley when I first moved there, basically as a kid 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago, give away my age, but it is just awesome. And it's astounding. 35,000 people watched my panel yesterday. Like it's almost ridiculous. Like that many people want to attend a panel on where Bitcoin payments are going. But that's what this space of Bitcoin and crypto has achieved in such a short time. Yeah, so let's stop there. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
It was a pleasure. Let's do the follow-up with an influencer panel.
Let's do it. I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that.
And maybe we'll get Tony on at some point together too.
Oh,
that would be awesome.
That would be so
I'm calling
fun.
you out, Tony. We're coming for you, babe. We're going to be in Palm Beach in a few weeks for the Permissionless Conference, and so maybe we'll figure that out. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining. That's a wrap. We will see you on the road again next week on Money Talks. Take care, everyone. Peace.